RBA Governor Philip Lowe has supposedly apologised for saying that he wouldn't hike rates until 2024. But is he really sorry? The news media is reporting that he is, but that's not exactly what he said at the Senate estimates hearing. Rather, specifically, he stated, "I'm sorry if people listened to what we'd said and acted on what we said, and now regret what they've done. I'm sorry that happened. I'm sorry people listened to what we'd said and acted on that, and now find themselves in a position they don't want to be in. At the time, we thought it was the right thing to do." In essence, he's blamed people for listening to the RBA, which is not exactly the best look if you're trying to maintain central bank credibility. He said, "Looking back, we would have chosen different language. People did not hear the caveats. I thought it was clear, but the community didn't think it was clear. Well, they thought it was clear that we weren't raising rates until 2024. That's a failure on our part." So at least Philip Lowe acknowledges that their language was not ideal, and acknowledges that maybe they should have used different language when saying that they weren't going to raise rates until 2024. Now, to give Philip Lowe some credit, he did in fact have some caveats around this statement. However, it's important to note a couple of things. Firstly, the general public doesn't quite hear those caveats. The general public isn't made up of economists or finance experts, so they aren't necessarily going to hear, well, X, Y, and Z as a caveat. They're going to hear the declaratory statement. Secondly, if he really wants the central bank to have credibility, he needs to be incredibly careful with his language and stick by that language. That means that they need to avoid excessively declaratory statements. Rather, they need to be circumspect. So he could say, "At this point, we don't anticipate seeing rates raising until 2024, but there are a lot of things that can happen. For example, inflation might force us to move our hand. For example, economic growth might pick up more rapidly than we're expecting." Or phrased differently, he needs to make those caveats much clearer than they were. This is particularly important since central bankers, including the Central Bank of Australia, so the RBA, and also the Federal Reserve, ideally should have credibility. It should be that when they say something, the market acknowledges what they are saying and acts accordingly, and can have faith in their statements being meaningful at that time. And if he's saying, well, people shouldn't have listened to us, or people shouldn't have taken us quite at face value, then he's almost implying that maybe the central bank shouldn't have the amount of credibility people are giving it. The second thing to note is that most market participants, so finance experts and economics experts, were even warning back in 2021, even in some cases early 2021 if we're looking at Michael Burry in the United States, that inflation was going to pick up and interest rates were going to have to increase. Philip Lowe notably said in November of 2021 that interest rates would remain at that low rate until 2024. This is despite the fact that most finance professionals were indicating that interest rates would probably likely need to increase and inflation was picking up. And if inflation's picking up, interest rates were likely going to need to pick up to attenuate that. This was clear all the way back in 2021, before the Ukraine war. All the way back when we saw that supply chain snarls were really biting, and inflation was likely to remain intransigent. That is, the transitory story had already been discredited by November 2021. So the statements themselves, A, shouldn't have been made in that declaratory manner, and B, weren't necessarily well grounded in any case. The RBA in the future should make sure that its statements are adequately circumspect, but should also reevaluate how they're doing policy analysis. The RBA could perhaps solve some of their analytical deficit by considering in more detail what the private sector is saying, so what fund managers and investment banks are saying, but also why they are saying it, so that they can reflect upon that outside analysis and then properly calibrate their own analysis as a result. Nevertheless, the RBA governor has sort of apologized in a bit of a non-apology way, and it is unfortunate we've gotten to this situation.